Hello, I hope you're doing well. I would like us to extend our discussion on sociological theories by looking at some of the similarities and differences between the two leading theoretical paradigms. In our previous discussion, we noted that there are three theoretical paradigms that are used in sociology and indeed the broader field of social sciences. These are conflict paradigm, functionalist paradigm, as well as symbolic interactionism. However, the most used paradigms are basically two, and these are conflict and functionalist paradigms. Our discussion today, we want to look at the similarities and differences between these two paradigms. It's an interesting discussion that I would like to request all of us to pay attention to, because sometimes you may be faced by situations in which you have to decide as a researcher, which of the two paradigms do I adopt in my study, and what then guides you when you're adopting a particular paradigm in your study and not the other. Perhaps one of the ways through which that can be made possible is by understanding where these two paradigms are similar and where they differ. So I want to invite you to this discussion. We want to begin our discussion by taking a look at the definition of sociological theories. I'm aware that we had defined sociological theories earlier, but there's no harm in looking at it again so that we set the base and the tone of our discussion today. Sociological theories can be defined as conceptual frameworks that are used by sociologists to understand, explain, and predict human behavior within the context of a given social structure or system. In other words, we say that if we are interested in understanding as to why things happen the way they do, then we are saying that there are certain arguments or propositions that have been put forward by scholars through rigorous research and experimentations over different places and over time, and for which consistent results have yielded, rather studies have yielded consistent results. And these results are now what have formed the foundation of durable explanations that are now put forward as sociological theories. So, theories are basically frameworks that scholars use in their effort to explain, understand, and even predict what happens in society at individual as well as societal level. Again, also in the context of social structures, social systems, as well as social institutions. With that understanding in mind, I now want us to look at the similarities and differences between conflict and functionalist theories. We want to begin by understanding or discussing some of the similarities first, then we shall move to the differences. One of the similarities that we find between conflict and functionalist theories or paradigms is the focus of the study, the focus of the explanations. That is, both theories are macro in nature. In other words, they focus on broader issues that happen in society. They look at broader social structures that shape individual behaviors and also how individuals influence what happens in those particular structures. They focus on institutions, they focus on structures, large-scale structures in society, and how individuals relate with other members in the context of these institutions and also these structures. So that conflict theory is concerned with how the powerful and holders of resources or capital exert their influence and power over the poor and marginalized members of society. Indeed, this is also broad. It does not look at it at micro level. Functionalism, again, also focuses on the role of social institutions in terms of sustaining social order. Again, structures. So both conflict and functionalism, they are micro. They are not like symbolic interactionism theory that focuses on small relationships, intimate, and how individuals relate with each other. This is not the focus of conflict and functionalism theory. So their focus is broad, and they deal with issues that affect broader sectors or wider sectors of society, and those are the structures. The other issue that also has been seen as being a similarity between the two broad perspectives, that is conflict and functional perspective, is the fact that both of them, they focus on structures and how social structures affect people as well as life chances. That is, they tend to minimize their focus on individuals. For instance, rarely do they look at how individuals survive, interact within the context of these social structures. In other words, their focus more is on the structures and how these structures affect the individual. They don't look at the individual as a member of the structures. Their focus is more on the structures themselves and their roles in terms of maintaining order or in terms of perpetuating the interests of those that the structures tend to favor. But they rarely look at how are individuals in these structures navigate, subvert, or interact with the social structures, so that their focus is more on the structure and not the components or the individuals that make up the structure. That is, again, we find it with both functionalism as well as conflict theory. For instance, conflict theories look at the two broader structures that exist in society and which they call the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Those are two broader structures. They rarely look at how are, say, members of the bourgeoisie themselves or members of the proletariat themselves interact with each other. They are more in terms of how is one group interact with the other group, other than looking at interactions within the group. Again, when we look at conflict, rather functional theory, they also look at structures of society. That is parts, the social institutions, the roles these social institutions play in society, but very little focus in terms of how are members of these institutions affecting the way these institutions work. Their focus is more on the broader aspect of the institution, but rarely, very minimal attention in terms of the interplay between members, individual members that make up each institution, or an individual member of one institution and the relationship it has with other members of other institutions at individual level. Instead, their focus is how is institution A interacting with institution B. They don't look at how are members of institution A interacting with each other, or how is a member in institution A interacting with a member of institution B. No, that is not their concern, because they focus more on the structure and not the nitty-gritties that exist between members of a given structure. So that is also a key similarity between the two sociological paradigms. The other important similarity between the two paradigms is that one of the status quo. That is, both functionalism and conflict theory look at the status quo in society and examine its influence on the social order. For instance, conflict look at the status quo in terms of the two groups, that is, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and how each side is trying to outdo the other so that at the end of the day, it has a sway in what goes on. Again, when we turn to functionalism, it's also looking at the institutions. For instance, the social institutions, family, education, economy, religion, and politics, and also more concerned with how are these institutions relating with each other? What roles or what functions are they playing? At what point are they independent, and at what point are they interdependent? So their focus is more with the present status of these structures. What are the present status of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie on the part of functional, or rather on the part of conflict theory? And again, what are the current status of social institutions, again, as far as functionalism is concerned? And what is their role? How do they relate with each other? Is it in form of consensus, or is it in form of competition? That is what both theories are focusing on. They are focusing on the present status. Rarely do they look at what will happen in future. How are these status likely to be in future? What are their futuristic role, or what are their futuristic relationship? No, they are more with the present condition and very little or minimal attention to what might happen to those institutions or those structures sometimes in the future. So that's also a key difference between, rather a key similarity between functionalism and conflict sociological paradigms. Having looked at some of the similarities between the two, I want us now to look at some of the differences between conflict theory as well as functionalist theory. And one of the things that we want to focus on is the structure of society. While both theories agree that society is structured, they differ in terms of how the structure looks like and the role those structures play in society. For conflict theory, they look at a society in terms of two structures, and that is the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, or the haves and the have-nots. That is what conflict theorists perceive society as being structured. For them, the bourgeoisie represents the rich, the most powerful, the wealthy, the most influential, while proletariat represents the poor, although there are many, the lower class, the marginalized, and the voiceless in society. So they both agree that society is structured, but they differ in terms of the nature of the structure. So with regard to functionalism, they look at society as being structured along the social institutions, that is, the family, the political system, the economy, religion, and education. So while conflict theory divides society into two structures, functionalism divides society into 5 structures. Again, functionalism look at these structures in terms of the roles they play, in terms of maintaining order, in terms of making society progress, while the conflict theory understands these structures in terms of perpetuating the domination or the divide between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So although both sides, both theories agree that society is structured, they differ in terms of how this structure is and in terms of the roles those structures play in society. One, look at structures in terms of undermining societal progress. That is the conflict theory, by marginalizing others and perpetuating the privileged class, the positions of the privileged class. While the other, that is the functionalist theory, look at these structures in terms of what they're doing to advance society forward. So that's also an important difference that exists between conflict and functionalist theory. The other issue is with regard to the functions of the structures. What are the functions of these structures as seen by conflict and functionalist theory? With regard to conflict theory, they look at these structures in terms of what they are doing to divide the society, to marginalize the society, by advancing the interests of the most powerful, the rich, and the most influential in society, and by using all possible means to ensure that they serve the interests of the privileged class, including the use of violence, intimidation, coercion, and other unorthodox means to ensure that the differences between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie is maintained. Any attempt by the proletariat to gain access to wealth, resources, and privileges so that they be at par with the bourgeoisie is resisted strongly. And some of the resources that the privileged exploit include money, property, commodities, dominance, and even social status. So that's the position of conflict theory with regard to the functions of the structures. On the other hand, functional theory holds that each of these structures, that is, the institutions that form the basis of structuring society according to functionalism, they play important roles in society. And these roles can be divided broadly into two, that is, manifest, or what we call main functions, and then latent, or what you can call secondary functions. So according to functionalism, structures of societies are specialized in the performance of certain functions. And in doing so, they are out to ensure that society progresses rather than regresses. So that's also a key similarity between the functionalism and the conflict theory. The other point of departure between the two sets of theories is with regard to social change. While both agree that there's need for society to change from one status to another over time, the method or the driver or the approaches to that change is quite different based on the various perspectives of the two. For conflict theory, they prefer rapid change, and change that is almost revolutionary in nature. While for functional theory, they prefer gradual change and change that is built on consensus, on discussions, and understanding. Again, functionalism consider small level change, that even if change is to occur, let it be small level, not large scale change that society might find it difficult to cope with from time to time. So that change, according again to conflict theory, is brought about by competition for scarce resources and also conflict between and among groups. So that for conflict theory, although there is change, the main source of change is competition and conflict between competing groups. While for functionalism, the main driver of change is social consensus. That is a discussion, understanding, people sitting together, discussing what is happening, and then agreeing on what is good for society. That is not the position of conflict theory. So while both theories agree that there is need for society to change, but they differ in terms of the type of change and in terms of what causes change. For conflict theory, change is brought about by competition for scarce resources and conflict between competing groups. While for functionalism, change is brought about by consensus and agreement among members of a given society. Again, for conflict theory, they prefer rapid and revolutionary change. But for functionalism, they prefer gradual change and incremental change, slow change, and also small level change. While for conflict theory, they prefer rapid and large scale change. Again, that is a major point of departure between the two sets of theories. The other issue is with regard to how law and order is maintained in society. How is society ordered? How are rules executed? Who is responsible? What methodology does a society employ to ensure that there is cohesion, there is understanding, and there is unity? Conflict theory believes that order in society is maintained by force, by coercion, and by intimidation by the ruling class, that the ruling class lord over to the masses and the poor, and they are forced to abide by the demands of the ruling class. So that the order that we see in society, according to conflict theory, it is not a product of understanding or voluntary participation of members of the community, but rather a product of coercion, a product of force, and a product of intimidation that the ruling class or the rich or the bourgeoisies subject their poor counterpart to. While functionalism also believe that there is need for social order, but according to them, social order is achieved through two main mechanisms, that is mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity. Mechanical solidarity is a form of cohesion or social order which arise when people in society maintain similar values and beliefs and also engage in similar types of work. Organic solidarity, on the other hand, is a form of social cohesion which arises when people in a society are interdependent and they have varying values and beliefs and engage again in varying work. For instance, if you take maybe neighborhood organizations in an urban setting, people in urban setting, they come from different cultures, but sometimes they are together by a common bond to say safeguard their security, fight drug abuse among the youth, and also come together in terms of self-help work. That is an example of organic solidarity. So they are likely to find themselves law-abiding and enforcing certain common values that are beneficial to them, despite the fact that they come from different cultural backgrounds. So that is possible because of what functionalists call organic solidarity. With regard to conflict theory, they look at it again in a different way, that it is violence, it is intimidation, and sometimes legislations that the ruling class come up with to corner the masses and ensure that they follow the rules, and those rules that are followed, they are those that are developed by the rich, and by following those rules, they serve the interests and the welfare of the rich and not the entire society. So that is how social order is maintained in society according to the two theories. One theory, that is conflict, feels that members of society are conditioned to obey orders because of the might of the wealthy, while functional theory believes that order is maintained because of interdependence and harmonious relationship that exist between members of society because of commonality of culture and moral values as well as beliefs. The last point of departure that we want to look at that exists between the two sets of paradigms is that one, their viewpoint of society. It is argued that conflict theory have a fairly pessimistic view of society, while functionalism have an optimistic view of society. In what sense? Conflict theory is said to have pessimistic view because it highlights change as a product of struggle, a product of strife, and a form of class conflict, and also societal pressure. In other words, if there is no struggle, if there is no strife, if there is no conflict, then there is no change, and that there is no society. So for them, society is characterized by violence, by conflict, by pressure, by strife, and by struggle. Again, any policies that society comes up with, be it a formal organization such as government, according to conflict theory, such policies are established not to benefit everyone else, but to sustain the dominance of the ruling class, of the wealthy, of the elite, at the expense of the poor and the marginalized. Again, this theory, conflict theory, perceives structures of society as solely designed to perpetuate inequality and suppress the voices of the marginalized, and that there is no any other function that these structures play in society apart from ensuring that those who have continue to have and those who do not have continue not to have, so that there are symbols of inequality, symbols of division, and symbols of suppression. That's according to conflict theory. Functionalism, on the other hand, is said to have an optimistic view of society because they suggest that changes in one part of society will necessitate changes in other parts of society, so that an equilibrium or a balance is always maintained in society, so that we do not have a society where there is imbalance, because that imbalance might not be fruitful or might not be a sign of progress society. So progress is maintained in society by adjustments in terms of changes that occur in one part of society, and subsequent changes are also necessary so that that equilibrium is maintained. And it considers any social policies and norms that establish society as being designed to sustain social order and ensure that each part of society is functioning for the benefit of the society in terms of harmony and also fulfilling the various functions that they have been designed or they were created to fulfill. It also looks at or underscores the positive aspects of social structures and their contributions for the preservation of society and values. So they don't look at the darker side of what happens in society, but they focus more on the brighter side, while conflict theory is more obsessed with the darker side, looking at society in terms of conflict, in terms of struggle, and in terms of competition. That, according to critics, it is more of a pessimistic view of what society is. Functionalism, because it looks at the positive side of society and the positive changes and progress that happen in society, then it is seen as being more of having a more of an optimistic view of society. At that point, we have come to the end of our discussion. I want to thank all of you for listening, and any issue that is not clear, kindly take time and comment. I will respond appropriately. Thank you so much.